Welcome back to another fireside conversation between myself and special guests Francesco Clement and David Fascinato. We are known around these circles as the Three Musketeers of Psychedelics and are here to help the second renaissance make way. Okay, that was really excessive, and that's okay, because today we're going to talk about exploring access to psychedelics among Canadian veterans, pathways, barriers, and perceptions. This was a paper that was released by Heroic Arts Canada and these two fine gentlemen and their associates this past December. So I'm going to hand it over to David and Francesco, and they're going to explain it, and we'll go into a little bit of details afterwards. David?
Thank you, Gordo. As mentioned, my name is David Fascinato, and I am the Executive Director of Heroic Hearts Canada, a registered charitable organization that seeks to empower veterans on their healing journey by facilitating access to psychedelic-assisted therapy. A number of years ago, when we got the organization started, we began a series of outreach meetings with different stakeholders in the space, which includes, at the end of the day, Veterans Affairs Canada, in order to really understand where we as an organization could best serve the interests of the veteran community, as well as sort of advancing our charitable goals of facilitating education and access and research and awareness about the opportunities for veterans with psychedelics. And it was in one of these conversations, actually, with the Chief Medical Officer at Veterans Affairs Canada, Dr. Sid Korshen, a very productive conversation wherein she highlighted the basic gaps of the absence of data, I should say, around how Canadian veterans have been accessing psychedelics. At that time, it was really just a lot of anecdotal information. So I could refer to, for example, myself and my own experience and journey with psychedelics in my own healing journey, or I could, sort of recount broadly the experiences of other fellow veterans with whom I've had conversations at the time about how psychedelics had benefited them. But at the end of the day, it was anecdotal, meaning that there was no hard evidence or data behind it. Besides the own, very qualitative personal stories of individuals who've, as we all know, have reaped, really positive effects from working with psychedelics in a supported setting. So it was from one of these conversations with Dr. Korshen where it was effectively put out in front of us where there's an opportunity to investigate this a little bit further. How could we, as a charitable organization that was still at that point in time looking to partner with different educational institutions and working with a set of clinical advisors and researchers, how could we, as a charitable organization, help advance our understanding, the collective understanding of what psychedelics could do for the veteran community? So it was from that little conversation. Oh, what was it? Probably about 3 years ago, almost 3 years and 2 months. I remember it was in the autumn. And there's opportunity, like I'm just going to underline there, that we could take and explore. So, being a good executive director, it took a little bit of time. How do we actually get into research? I thought originally of putting out a survey monkey. I'm not an academic, I'll be perfectly honest. So I said, well, why don't we try to accumulate and access that data ourselves? But in speaking with my clinical advisory group at the time, it was quickly pointed out to me that doing this properly, by engaging with a university here in Canada, how could we partner with them to put together a proper research project where we could investigate this question and hopefully generate the data that was currently missing? So it was in through those conversations with my clinical advisory group and with others in the space that it came to be that we were looking to build a full-scale research project. I put out the call for support across different organizations, MAPS Canada being one of them. And it was through that outreach that I was able to meet with Francesco Clement on the call today, as well as our colleague Michelle Scott, who unfortunately isn't on this call as well, who took it upon themselves, and we started working collaboratively as a team to start mapping out what this research project could be. It was effectively a twinkle in my eye at one point from a conversation with wonderful people at Veterans Affairs Canada and other organizations that led Heroic Hearts Canada to the point of embarking upon a research project. And it was through the initial work with Francesco and Michelle that we ended up engaging with University of Calgary and really building out what would become to be called the ECHO project, a research project, a retrospective observational study on Canadian veteran experiences with psychedelics, with the goal of trying to generate a snapshot of information, of data, of how Canadian veterans up to that point had accessed psychedelics in their own healing journeys. And so, what started, 3 years ago, 3 years, 2 months ago, has now, transformed into a published paper in the Journal of Psychedelic Medicine and future stages of research, which I'm happy to elaborate upon further after Francesco shares a little bit more about the outcome of that wonderful research project.
Thank you, David, for the wonderful introduction. As you heard, it's been 3 years in the making of getting the study on the ground, and I'm happy to say we're finally here and we finally made it. We just want to point out, like, the main purpose of the study was to understand, that we have this growing interest in psychedelic therapies here in Canada, especially among veterans. And a lot of veterans, they come to have diagnoses that are very comorbid, meaning there might be PTSD, chronic pain, depression, anxiety, all being diagnosed at once. Now, to treat conditions that can be so complex, we're looking for different medical psychedelics to help out and understand whether these treatments are effective and whether they're useful for treating these disorders that we can see in the current literature. Now, what's interesting to look at is that in this study, we had a lot of participants, namely about 30 of them, and we kind of went in and we wanted to ask them, what was their experiences accessing psychedelics within Canada, within the framework? What are the perceptions that they have for psychedelics themselves, and evaluate whether, the landscape is healthy towards accessing psychedelics for mental health concerns and sleep disorders. Now, we have to look at the results too, where we kind of see that, hey, you know what? There are these comorbid diagnoses, and most everybody in the study did confirm that they received most of these diagnoses due to their participation within the military, especially PTSD related concerns. They were all mostly service related. Now, due to the high rates of PTSD that we're finding, veterans were looking for an alternative pathway to find some source of healing for themselves. Now, when we're trying to find and access psychedelics, we found that most participants actually found out about psychedelics through their peers. So they weren't finding out about psychedelics through professionals within their scope, within their proximity. They weren't finding out about it through their doctors. A lot of these veterans were also on many different medications before trying psychedelics as well. We have to note that as well. But one thing that we need to understand as well is that because access can be so limited, such as getting authorized access through the Special Access Program Canada or Exemption 56, most veterans are accessing psychedelics through unconventional means, meaning underground or unregulated pathways. Most notably, we found that most veterans were accessing psychedelics locally here in Canada, most notably psilocybin, also known as magic mushrooms. And this was all done without the guidance of a regulated form of trip sitter, psychotherapist, or some form of clinician. Now, what's interesting about the study as well, although most of the experiences were underground, most all participants agreed that their experience would have greatly benefited through having a regulated professional there with them, through having a regulated professional to supervise them, to help them through the experience. But not only that, but after the experience, to help them understand and process what happened. Because as we know, and we talk about within the psychedelic sphere, is that the integration, what happens after, is sometimes more important than the trip itself. Right. That's the part where we find meaning making, understanding, and more psychological insight to our own lives and our own, purpose of what we're trying to create here. Now, we also have understanding of some barriers that veterans really kind of voiced for themselves, whereas they're mostly afraid of bringing up access to psychedelics to their physicians due to fear of stigma. Right. There might be some form of stigma associated with psychedelic use for sure. We could understand why. However, one interesting finding was also that there's legal insurance consequences. Now, I can't comment on exactly what they mean by legal and insurance consequences. However, I'm sure we could look further into that, what that perhaps could portray or frame for understanding of what's happening. Um, Now, we have to recognize that, yes, a lot of these things are happening maybe overseas or underground, but maybe it's time that we bring these treatments here, as most all participants did say that they benefited from these psychedelic experiences. Therefore, perhaps we could find a legal pathway here in Canada that could speed run this process to help veterans seek psychedelics in the most healthiest and legal way possible, right? Because why do we need to send veterans overseas or make them suppress something that's healing for them when we could have it right here and right now? And I think that segues really well into our VARP conceptualization, which I think Gore, David could maybe talk a little bit more about.
Yeah, I think let's focus back though on the research thing because I think
Hmm.
some of the big takeaways when I hear about this in the survey, when I'm taking away from it, is that these are like unregulated pathways that people are trying mind-altering substances, and we're almost getting into the world of like harm reduction at this point, right? Like, at what
Hmm.
point is the onus on actually a governing body to implement some sort of framework to this because so many people are doing it? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. What is your key, I guess, takeaway, Francesco? And then I'll ask the same thing from David.
Absolutely. No, I think the key takeaway is that, hey, we have actual scientific data pointing at that veterans are accessing psychedelics. So why are we suppressing the system that works for people? Why can't we find, means of harm reduction, like you self said, where we can prevent any form of psychosocial or psychological harm that could occur when you are using on your own without a guided trip sitter, without psychoeducation, without some form of understanding of how the whole process works, right? Therefore, if we have the data, let's co-construct something that's actually going to bring forth health and wellness to our society and especially to our veterans.
Thanks, Gordo. What I think was really interesting about the research and the outcomes was that I had some hypotheses were going into it. And I think what's interesting is that the research sort of confirmed a lot of the things that I felt go like as a veteran who had accessed psychedelics themselves and who was working within a charitable organization to foster access for other veterans in need was that the research pointed to the fact that the challenges, the barriers are very real. The stigma is real. And that prevents a lot of people from pursuing these modalities. And I think the opportunity here from this first phase of the research is to take it to the next stage, to see what we can further explore with the data we were able to collect, and look at it with fresh eyes, as well as pointing, frankly, to additional research that we can do with other partners in order to support the conversation. Evidence and data is going to drive the conversation around safe access to psychedelics. So, whatever
Yeah.
we can do is going to make that difference and push that needle forward. I know it's not sexy. It certainly isn't sexy, but what it does at the end of the day is it gets us as a community uh, a seat at the table so we can have these discussions with the decision makers and with the stakeholders and be on equal footing so we can be our own advocates for care and for our own advocates in terms of access to psychedelics in a safe, effective environment.
So I think the one important thing David is hinting at is that although we had a small sample size, we do have to recognize that this study was a pilot study in the sense that it was the first of its kind, right? Especially for Canadian combat veterans in the Canadian sphere, right? A lot of research studies with psychedelics do come from the States, but now we're trying to bring things more within the Canadian side and understand how the Canadian dynamics play into access, authorization, pathways, and we need to recognize and bring forth a lot of the allies we have within academia, such as the University of Calgary, Luis Contreras, and Leah Mayo. Big shout out to them. And we need to find more individuals within academia who are willing to support this cause and bring it forward to conduct more research on a larger scale and bring more people together, find actual evidence-based data to really start clinical based conversations and pathways for access.
Heck yeah, Francesco. That's exactly what I'm talking about. We need that partnership vibes. Um, Too much stuff is going on in a silo. too much research. It's not about not having the research. There's actually a lot of research. It's just everyone's kind of doing it in their own silos, and that's been a really big part of our mission is to actually bring people together to cut right through the questions, to cut right through any of the barriers, and be able to give access to people to have fulfilling lives, to feel worth, to feel just good. And I think everyone deserves that. When we're talking about partnerships, right, you can see there's a research proponent to this and then the lived experience proponent, but we also have another angle to this. And that angle is actually something called the Veterans Accelerated Access Research Program. And this is something that we've put forth to the government in different bodies, and we're trying to get it shopped around right now. And you might ask what that is. And boy, oh boy, you guys need to stick around for the next episode where we actually discuss what the VARP is and how we plan to implement it. So, questions, comments, queries, put them in the comments below. We'll give you guys all the answers. All the love from David, Francesco, and myself, and we'll see you on the next episode.